Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Extraordinary Stories with Extraordinary People. My name is Amy Kochek with Amy Kochek Creative. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just to give you, I always try to give a little explanation of what we do here and why we do it. Amy Kochek Creative is a writing business that is focused on all things story related. So I do coaching for writers. I do workshops and seminars centered around writing, whether it be writing your book or using your own story to help you grow for personal development, for breakthroughs, for trauma healing. So everything that I do, I also do ghostwriting as well, which is just helping people take their story that resides inside of them and bring it out and articulate it and deliver it to the masses. Throughout my journey of building this business and meeting people, I've heard so many people make the mention of, when I say I'm a ghostwriter, or I do anything with books or stories, so many people who say, oh my goodness, I've always wanted to write a book, or, oh, I know this person has a great story, but at the tail end of that is but I don't, or but they don't because, and there's always an excuse, and the excuse can be valid. But at the end of the day, the thing that connects us, the thing that makes life worth living, the place of our greatest learning is through our stories and hearing other people's stories. So I use this platform as much as possible to highlight things that are going on with my story and then bring on really extraordinary people who are doing great things in their lives and maybe have been looked over, or they just haven't had an opportunity to share their story at a larger scale. So today I am so excited. I have Ilan Glazer. And I am continuously amazed at the people that come into my life and the impact that they leave just from these simple 30 to 45-minute interviews. And Elon has such a phenomenal story to share with you today. So Elon, we're going to jump right into it. So I just want you to start by introducing yourself. Who are you? What do you do? Tell us any other relevant information you want to share.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me on today. It's an honor to be on your show. And I am a freelance rabbi and a addiction and recovery coach. So I made the decision to move from being a congregational rabbi to working in the addiction world. And I still do freelance life cycle events and teaching at a number of Jewish institutions. And now I'm focusing on building a movement around recovery from addiction in the Jewish world. So speaking and teaching and coaching people and helping them get the resources they need to overcome their struggles and to find a better way forward.
Awesome. Can you just tell me what's the difference between a freelance rabbi and like a career rabbi?
So freelance just means that I'm not tied to one institution. When I was a congregational rabbi, I was a rabbi of that synagogue, and I worked mostly to support the community that I was hired by. Now I'm a freelance rabbi, which means I can have, sometimes rabbis will call me and they'll say, hey, we need someone to do a funeral today, or I can go officiate at a wedding over there, or do a baby naming over there, or, speak or teach whatever I'm needed.
Okay, interesting. So let's focus on a pivotal moment in your life, something that happened to you that changed the trajectory of where you were and where you eventually were going, which is here. So before you jump into the actual pivotal moment, set us up. What were you doing? What was going on in your life? And then take us to that moment that things changed for you.
Sure. Well, so the way I got into this work, there were two moments that really crystallized this for me. And I didn't know anything about addiction when I was growing up. I knew that my mother said we were not allowed to drink or do drugs, so I didn't. I knew that she often used eating or shopping or playing games as a way to distract herself from her emotions. And I know that I did the same, right? And I got into food, and I got into pornography, and I got into fantasy world and gaming and all these issues from a young age, but I didn't know that this was even a thing. So fast forward until I was in rabbinical school. My father was a rabbi, my mother was a Jewish educator, and I decided I was going to continue the tradition and become a rabbi as well, although a little bit differently than how he did it. And when I was in rabbinical school, we were required to do a unit of what's called CPE, or clinical pastoral education, which is training in a hospital or a chaplaincy setting. And during this training, I was working as a congregational rabbi in northern New Jersey at the time, and although I was still in rabbinical school, and I went to do this unit, and we had a month-long unit on addiction. And the instructors suggested to us, me and my fellow students, that we should pay attention to the crazy things the people in the videos were saying so that we could understand the life of an addict and what they go through. Okay, so I'm watching these videos and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, some of the things that they're saying sound pretty darn similar to the things that I say in my head, and what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And it was probably the first time, and I was in my mid-20s at this point, it was probably the first time that I thought I might be an addict too. And at the time, all I could sort of hold was I knew that I ate a lot, and I knew that I was always eating desserts. My mother was a professional baker, and I learned to eat at a very young age. And I knew that that was a problem for me. So I said, okay, I've got this food thing. And I saw a doctor who said that I needed to go off of gluten and sugar and dairy, which was, the curse of death for someone who liked food as much as I did.
Yeah.
But I made my peace with it. And I started going to some recovery meetings, but not really. And, fast forward a couple years later, I moved to another synagogue in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was sharing the job with my now ex-wife. And things were not going well at the synagogue or at home, and the couples counselor we were seeing suggested that I go to a week-long healing retreat at a place called Onsite outside Nashville. And they have a program called the Healing Trauma Program. And you go for a week, they take away your cell phone, and they put you in a room with 8 or 9 other people and a therapist. And we spent the whole week talking about childhood trauma and abuse and emotions and feelings. And the more traumatic experiences you have as a kid, the more likely you are to manifest that into addiction or depression or abuse or just difficult forms of living, which I had done. So I'm sitting there and my mind is totally blown, and I came to understand that it wasn't just food I was dealing with. It was food, it was pornography, it was codependency, it was picking at my skin and pulling at my hair, and procrastination and perfectionism, and just all these ways that I had not been finding the joy inside, and all these ways that I had been living from a very difficult place. And so the moment that really got me was they asked us to bring a small picture of ourselves from when we were a child so that we could do some imaginal exercises and connect to our own inner child. Most of us for the first time. I certainly didn't have a good connection to my own inner life growing up. And so, okay, I find this picture. I'm a baby. I'm cute. I'm thin. I'm smiling. Everything looks great. I bring this picture to Onsite. And we're doing these exercises, and I'm trying to connect to my own inner child, whatever that means, because I didn't really know how to do that, but I figured I can play along.
Yeah.
And it wasn't quite working for me because I'm not really the touchy-feely, imaginary, meditative guy. But all right, there's value to it. And we're doing this exercise repeatedly to connect with our own inner child, and for reasons that I don't really understand. The picture was in a metal frame with glass on the front, and on the back of the picture, there was a little sheet of cardboard holding the frame intact. And I took the cardboard off and I slid out the backing, and I noticed that there on the back of the picture, written in my mother's handwriting, was the date of the picture and the name of the child who was my older brother. And I started to crack up, and I thought to myself, well, you're in trouble when your inner child is somebody else. And that was it. I was like, this is ridiculous, right? On so many levels, it was the perfect metaphor. And from there, I just realized that I had a lot of work to do. And it was almost overwhelming, but it was overwhelming to think about how was I possibly going to address all these things that I had learned, all these unhealthy patterns and behaviors. And slowly but surely, I started finding my way, and I found books, and I found podcasts, and I found a sponsor, and I started going to meetings and working the program of recovery. And I've been doing that for almost 5 years now. And now I'm blessed to have written a book about my experiences and how to help the Jewish world. And I'm really trying to create that movement so that I can help others get the healing that I found. And it's been a real joy and an honor and a blessing. And now I can say that my inner child is fully my own at this point.
Yeah. So let's rewind a little bit, because most addictions are a form of avoidance, right? Like something in your environment has become too much for you to cope with. So you choose another coping mechanism. And I find it interesting that you're growing up in a very religious community, in a very religious home, where someone might assume, of course, you're not going to face those issues. Of course, you're not going to have problems because you live it's something quite religious,
Sure.
So my first question is, what essentially were you trying to avoid? What are these addictions covering and feeding so that you don't have to face it? What are you running from? What are you not wanting to face?
Mm-hmm. So at the time, I'll say a couple of things. On the outside, we were the perfect family, right? My father was the rabbi, my mother was a teacher and a principal of a Jewish day school. And on the outside, we were always happy and giving to other people. But inside the house, we weren't so happy together. And my parents had a difficult marriage. It's not easy to be a rabbi of a synagogue. And we moved a number of times throughout my childhood. And my mom had, over the course of her life, she had 5 different forms of cancer and 2 liver transplants. And there was always this constant threat that she was going to go into the hospital, that she was going to get sick, that she was going to die. And I became the stereotypical middle child caregiver role. I have an older brother and 2 younger siblings, but I fell into the taking care of mom, taking care of the family, and cooking and cleaning and laundry and dishes and all that. And I will say that my parents both had tempers, one more than the other, and home life was not always kind or calm, and it certainly wasn't safe.
Yeah.
And I lived in fear a lot of being yelled at, mostly by my mother, but sometimes by my father. And I didn't have the space to understand my own inner emotional life, right? And I was running from the anxiety, from the feelings that things just weren't okay in the house, which is true. They weren't okay in the house. And I didn't know how to process that. And I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. I learned to eat instead, right? And I learned just to sulk instead. And I don't want to make my parents out to be bad people, right? They loved me and they did the best they could with difficult situations. And I'm honored to be their son, and I learned a lot from both of them over the course of their lives. But many people who fall into addiction do so because home isn't safe, and it wasn't for me. And I was trying to do it. Like, I couldn't speak up in the house. I didn't really have a voice to express my own sadness and frustration, and I couldn't deal with that. So I ran into addiction instead.
Yeah. So now let's go to the point where you're the realization of, oh my God, I think I'm an addict. When you get to that realization, what are the emotions that come after that? When you're having this revelation, how are you feeling at that point?
I can't be an addict. I'm a nice Jewish kid. I do good things for other people. I want to be a rabbi. I teach Torah. How could I be an addict? This doesn't happen to nice Jewish boys, except, of course, it happens to nice Jewish boys. We just don't talk about it happening. And oh, dear Lord, like, what does this even mean? And is addiction fatal? Are there ways to move forward? Am I going to die? Am I going to get help? Or am I going to have to talk about these feelings that I don't even know how to access them? All of that was going through my head. And then, when in my earlier days, I also, when I was working as a congregational rabbi, I couldn't talk about any of this publicly because you may know clergy aren't supposed to have any problems, and all clergy we're all saints, we're all perfect right when we get ordained, right? That's what we like to tell ourselves.
Right.
Except of course we have problems, and there's a tremendously high rate of burnout and depression and divorce amongst clergy because it's not an easy lifestyle. And I couldn't talk about this to my congregation because, who wants to hear their rabbi talking about pornography and addiction? Nobody wants to hear that, which I understand. And I had to find ways to find other people and other resources who could help me. And I'm so grateful that I did. But it was not easy. And there were many, many days when I worried that, life as I knew it was going to totally implode. And the truth is, it did. And it needed to. And the life that I've built since has been much better.
Yeah. So, two questions. One, we'll start with this one. From your perspective, growing up religious and being in the Jewish world, why is it? And maybe if this is just a commentary on religion in general, why is it that in that environment there's so much fear in revealing secret spaces of your heart that you're struggling, like real stuff that's going on, like even in your home life, like that you felt like you could not reveal that. And even as a rabbi, that you could not get up in front of your congregation and say, this is what I'm struggling with. Why is that such a fear? And even when we see that it's damaging, why do we keep doing it in that religious environment?
These are good questions that you're asking. And I think that ultimately I'll say a couple things. Number one, these are hard issues to work on, right? They're messy. They're challenging. They get at the core of who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. And does God care about us when we're suffering? And do we care about us when we're suffering? And it's the world today feels so overwhelming with gun violence and climate change and disease and hunger and homelessness and poverty and all of that wrapped together. I think many people want their religious communities just to have a place to feel safe and to remind them that they're going to be okay, which of course is what we all want and need. But I think we can go a little bit deeper and not just share in music and not just talk about how we're doing over the lunch table, right? I think we really can use religion. I think religion can be one of the best healing techniques that this world has ever had when used well. Unfortunately, too often it's used in coercive ways and can lead to violence and destruction. And I think that, for a lot of people, there's a tremendous amount of pain and suffering around addiction. And this isn't the only issue we don't talk about. We don't really talk about domestic violence. We don't talk about mental health challenges in general. We don't talk about the burdens of caregiving and illness on a lot of our loved ones. And sure, we can bake a pie or, bring a dinner over to a family, but how many of us are really willing to sit with another family and hear what they're going through and offer to help? It's hard work to do that. And I think that we live in a time where we want the quick fixes. And these issues don't have quick fixes. They take a lot of courage to just sit with our pain and our suffering. And I feel like we've a little bit lost the ability to do that in more recent times, where we turn on our TV shows and we want all the dramas to be solved in 42 minutes or less. And that's just not how emotions and feelings work. It's hard, it's messy, and we don't really have the bandwidth because the world is just moving faster and faster. And we're always, I shouldn't say we, many of us, we're just, we're worried about being judged as well. What is everybody else going to think about me if they know that I'm struggling? Right? Are they going to abandon me? Maybe it's better that I just don't talk about it and just pretend that everything's okay so they won't know how bad things really are. And I think that's, I understand it. I get it. It's normal, but I think that religion at its core is designed to help people grow through the struggles of their lives and help them find inner peace and happiness and health and holiness. And I think that that's what religion can be. And thankfully, there are more and more people who are starting to get that and to help talk to people about where they really are in life. And I hope that that will only continue.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk about once you discovered that you were addicted and you were seeking help. I want to talk about the imploding of your life. So the breaking down, it's almost like the unlearning.
Sure.
And then relearning. So what did you do to break all of that down to the base? And then what did you do to rebuild? And how did that feel?
Mm-hmm. When I really understood, at that week of learning at onsite, when I really got it, that this was my life, as it were, I understood that many things needed to change. And so I did a number of things. I hired a coach, and I started working with someone twice a month to help me think about my goals and my visions and my values for who I wanted to be. I went back to personal growth seminars, and I walked on hot coals, and I swallowed fire, and I jumped out of a plane after getting divorced. And I was very sad that the marriage ended, but we didn't really have the solid foundation that we needed for us to continue. And I'm certainly grateful to my ex, but the marriage needed to end. And I started going to a lot of meetings. There was a wonderful church in Memphis called Hope Presbyterian Church, and they host lots of recovery meetings. And I did eventually start going to those. They also have trainings and meetings on codependency in relationships. And I went to that to try and look at why was it actually that almost every relationship I had was basically the same thing repeated over and over again. And amazingly enough, that's the case because there was a common denominator, me, right? Mm-hmm. I was the same person, and I was attracting the same kind of relationship, and I needed to break those patterns. I needed to understand that it was okay for me to just be myself and not have to put on fronts and not have to pretend to be something I wasn't, and that I could speak up and challenge myself and really think about who did I want to attract and what kind of relationship I wanted to have. And so that codependency and relationships training was incredibly valuable. They also had a divorce care class, and I did that, and lots of other recovery meetings, which I went to. And then I started listening to podcasts, and I went to a couple of recovery conferences, and I found a sponsor, and I worked the program, and I started going to the gym 2 or 3 times a week and exercising and eating better and taking better care of myself. And I also got involved in Toastmasters. I had been interested in public speaking, and it had been on the back of my mind for years to get involved with Toastmasters. And I finally went to their website and found a chapter and threw myself into that. And I forced myself to give speeches and work the program and worked my way up over a couple of years to become a distinguished Toastmaster, their highest level. And it was good. I was really pushing myself to see what more did I have in me, and really trying to design a better and happier life for myself. And ultimately, after about a little over a year of work following the divorce, I started dating again, and I connected with someone who I had known tangentially many, many years before, and we reconnected on Facebook and got married almost 2 years ago, and life is a lot better than it ever has been before. And
can you talk about, because there's a lot of community building and personal growth,
sure,
all of which phenomenal. What's happening to you emotionally because a lot of the implosion process is pulling up, almost like connected to the inner child example you said.
Yep.
It's a lot of pulling up past patterns and pain and emotions that you've spent years shoving down, but now you have to dig up.
Yep.
How do you deal with the emotions? Because a lot of people, their excuse of not going back is, why would I go back to something that caused me so much pain? What's happening to you as you're going back? And what's the process you're going through? And what was the value of that for you?
Right. So I was very grateful to find a sponsor who helped me work through the 12 steps of recovery. And the steps really do help you identify who you are and what values are important, but what have you done that you're not happy about, right? I needed to come to grips with the fact that, yeah, when I was in high school, I stole pornography from the bookstore across the street, right? And I had mistreated a few people, not many, but some. And there were things that I wasn't happy about having done in the world. And part of the steps is making recovery and making amends to those people and doing that emotional work to clean up my past. And when I made my list of people who I needed to make amends for, there were over 40 people on the list. And I reached out to each and every one of them and had those conversations to the best of my ability. And it was very healing for me. And I can look myself in the mirror and know that I'm okay in a way that I couldn't do before. That's one piece of it. The other piece is, I really did need to sit with all of the feelings from childhood. And I was in therapy as well, and I saw another emotional healer as well for that. And it brought up a lot of old pain of I'm scared and I'm feeling sad and I'm angry, and why wasn't home life better? And why didn't I have a normal childhood? And why did I pick up, these addictions? And what did that all mean? And, was it fun dealing with all of that? No. But I came to understand that I didn't have to be defined by my wounds. I didn't have to judge myself only according to the worst things I'd ever done, right? And that just because someone was mad at me doesn't necessarily mean that it was my fault, right? Yeah. I didn't have to own other people's emotions. I just had to be the best me I could be, right? And I had to clean up a lot of work around that because, when I was a kid, I used to think that if I was getting yelled at by my parents, right, everybody wants to know that their parents are good people and the parents must be right. Except just because they were yelling at me doesn't mean I did something wrong, right? It could have just been that was one of their strategies that they used to deal with their own emotions, right? And I had to just tease out what was mine and what was theirs. And I didn't need to take ownership or responsibility for their behavior. It was what it was, right? I needed to just say, these were the patterns I learned, and I needed to unlearn some of those patterns or to just choose to make different choices for who I wanted to be. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't do some recovery reading and literature or go to a meeting or call a friend, right? I'm still doing that work today. It doesn't stop, right? When I meet people today, they ask me, they say, what do you know about recovery? You can't be an addict. And I'm like, well, yes, I am. And I know quite a bit about it, as it turns out. And, they say, well, did you get cured? And I said, well, you don't get cured. You just get better one day at a time.
Yeah.
And are there times today when some of the past, feels overwhelming? Absolutely. Are there times when I want to revert back to some of my old behaviors? Absolutely, right? That's why I had to give up flour and sugar and gluten and dairy, because I couldn't have just one cookie. I wanted the whole box of cookies, and even that wouldn't have been enough. Yeah. Right? And now when I go to the grocery store, I sort of thumb my nose at the ice cream aisle and say, I don't need you anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, of course, childish, but I'll take it, right? I mean, I could be proud of the fact that I don't need those things to feel better about myself. And when I feel sad or angry or lonely or isolated or bored or any of that, I can call someone and just check in with them. I can go to a meeting. I can talk to my sponsor. I can go for a walk outside. I can go ride my bicycle. I can go to the gym, right? I can find healthier ways of dealing with these emotions, including just being with my own inner child and say, hey, what are we feeling right now?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's enough, right? There's no magic shift other than to say, I get to be who I want to be, and I get to make better choices today.
Yeah.
And, I can't even begin to tell you, had you told me 5 years ago that you and I would be having this conversation after having moved and divorced and remarried and written a book, I would have said, no way is any of that possible.
Yeah.
And the magic of recovery is, it is possible. A better life is always possible if we're willing to do the work.
Yeah. What's one of the, so through this whole situation that you've been through in the past 5 years, what would you say is the one major takeaway? What's the one big lesson that you learned from all of this?
I would say the biggest lesson is just that I can create a life that I want, and I can take ownership and responsibility for my own inner and outer world. And that doesn't mean that everything is going to be easy, but it means that blaming my childhood is not going to help anything. And it means that I don't have to continue old patterns and ways of thinking that didn't serve me then, and that I don't need to continue now. I can create a great life for myself. And more importantly than that, that I have what to say. Right? When I was a kid, I didn't think that my voice mattered, and now I know because people tell me, and they call me up, and they're inspired by some of the work that I'm trying to do, and they tell me that this work is important, and I know that with the people I'm connecting with, and with my clients, and with my loved ones, and I matter to the world, and I don't think I knew that when I was younger, and I want everyone to know how much they matter. There's a wonderful quote that says, "The day you were born is the day God decided the world couldn't go on without you any longer." Mm. And I really believe that if we're still here, we're here for a reason. We're here because there's some good work left for us to do. And it's daunting to think about reorienting one's life, and it's daunting to think that a better world can be had for us. It's easier to think that I'll never make it through, that this is just who I am, that I deserve all of the sadness and all of the pain because I must be a screwed up person after all. It's easy to think that. It's hard to change, but a better life is possible when we own the fact that we all matter to the world. And, I want that for everyone. And that's why I do the work that I do. And if there's one takeaway that I've learned, it's that I matter and that I have power to create a better life.
Yeah. So I want you to talk directly to the viewers, whether it be live or on replay. And I want you to talk specifically to those who may be struggling with addiction. Either it's still in private and they don't feel like they're able to come forward, or they've identified it, but they're struggling through the essential imploding process and the rebuilding. What is something that you can tell them as a piece of advice or just encouragement?
So I'll say a couple of things. Number one is a better life is possible. And no matter what you're going through, there are other people who've gone through it as well. Maybe not in exactly the same way, because everybody's a little bit different. But if you're struggling with alcohol, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've recovered from alcoholism, right? There are thousands and thousands of people who've gotten off drugs, who've gotten over their addiction to food, who've gotten off cigarettes and vaping or marijuana or whatever it is, right? There are thousands of people who struggle with picking at their skin and pulling out their hair. And there are conferences and there are retreats and there are meetings that you can go to where you can find people who are willing to say what they said to me, which is that we know where you are and we know the steps and we'll be with you until you get there. So my best piece of advice is to say, you can't do this alone. We cannot recover on our own. We need people. We absolutely need community who can support us as we go through this. And that's number one. Some of us need medication. Some of us need rehab. Some of us can do that inpatient or outpatient. And everybody's journey is different, right? So I think if you can find someone, a sponsor, a therapist, a coach, a clergy person who can help you figure out what are some of the ways that can be beneficial to you, right? Because, not everybody goes to meetings and not everybody works the steps and not everybody takes medication. And I want everyone to find the resources that work for them, right? And that's what I'm blessed to do with the people I work with and for my own life. And we need that. We can't heal on our own. So no matter what you're going through, I guarantee you that there are other people who are going through it as well. And for sure, it's not easy work to change this, right? But ask yourself this, at the end of the day, would you rather be someone who gets through it, or would you rather be someone who just gives in?
Yeah.
I know that most of us at our heart, we know that the things we're doing aren't healthy for us. We may not know how bad we are, but we make these excuses and we make these bargains with ourselves. We say, I'll just do it for another day. I'll just do a little bit today, right? what if you use those same skills? I'll just do a little bit to work on your own recovery, right? I'll just go to the gym for 10 minutes. I'll just call a friend. I'll just go to one meeting this week. I'll just listen to one recovery podcast, right? I'll just make one phone call to see what's out there for me. And I guarantee you, right? One day after another, one step after another, that's how progress is made. And I guarantee you that there are people waiting to help you. And you can do it.
We're going to close out with this, Elon. So I want you to tell us how all of this experience kind of shifted you into the career you're in right now. So tell us what you're doing, the books, the podcast, the things that are coming up, and then close us out with how our audience can get in touch with you.
Sure. So I wrote a book recently. It's called And God Created Recovery, Jewish Wisdom to Help You Break Free from Your Addiction, Heal Your Wounds, and Unleash Your Inner Freedom. And it includes my story. It includes some Jewish texts around addiction, because I wanted to show that this is not a new problem in our world, and that we have some tools to do it. I look at each of the 12 steps of recovery, and I give sort of a Jewish commentary on them, and show that there's no inherent disconnect between recovery work and living a Jewish life. And I share other techniques within Jewish tradition that can be helpful to anyone going through recovery. And now I created a Facebook group. It's called Our Jewish Recovery, which we welcome Jews and non-Jewish friends who are interested in recovery, whether that's the addict themselves or the loved ones or an educator or a clergy person, right? People are definitely welcome to join. It's at facebook.com/groups/Our Jewish Recovery. It asks you 3 short questions to get in, and I do require everyone to answer those questions before I let people in, so that I can make sure that it's a safe space for everyone. And now I'm building a coaching program around recovery from addiction in the Jewish world, and down the line creating a Jewish recovery podcast and weekend retreats and an annual sober Jewish cruise, I hope, and more literature, and maybe a monthly magazine. I don't know, maybe other training programs for every rabbi and cantor and Jewish educators, so that they can understand what recovery is and what it isn't, and how we can help our young people and everyone of all ages struggling today. I want to help shift the narrative from this isn't our problem to, of course, this is our problem, and it's our responsibility to help everybody get the help that they need. So that's the work that I'm doing today, and I'm incredibly blessed to work with amazing people who are trying to turn their lives around. And it's, every time I share my story, every time I hear somebody else's story, every time I connect with anyone trying to better themselves, it helps my own journey of recovery as well. And it's a true honor and a blessing. And so if there's anyone out there who's listening to this who I can be a resource for, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, whether through the Facebook group, Our Jewish Recovery, or through the book. And you can also find me, Rabbi Elon at torahoflife.com. Torah of Life is the name of the podcast that I have already. And you can find me at torahoflife.com. My new website, rabbielon.com, will be up in a few weeks, I hope. And I welcome anyone who needs help, anyone who just wants to connect, anyone who has suggestions, anyone who is looking for resources. Whether I can help you or not, I'll be happy to connect with anyone and to spend time sharing with anyone who wants to help provide resources for other people to heal, whether Jewish or not, whether in addiction or not, right? This disease doesn't care who we are or which faith we are in. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do what we can to help others who are suffering. So if there's any way I can be helpful to any of your listeners, it'd be an honor and a privilege to do so.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll put that information in the comments as well, so that they
great.
Have Thank you. To it. Elon, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story, for your vulnerability, for your truth. As I always say, it's so important to be a consumer of the content, be a connector. So reach out to Elon if you are struggling with addiction, or you know somebody that is and that needs just someone to connect to that gets it. Reach out to him as a resource. And as always, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Please join us later on in the week for another episode of Extraordinary